What is division? Today we're going to take a look at a concept called division. In division, we take a number of objects and we break them down into smaller groups of equal size. Each smaller group, we have to remember, will be of equal size. So let's take a look at an example. We are going to look at an example where we have 12 apples. So I have drawn 12 apples, these are apples, little apples, on the board. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 apples. And my instructions are that I have 12 apples and I want to divide them into 4 equal groups. So I'm going to take my 12 apples and I'm going to divide them into 4 equal groups. So let's put a box around all the apples first. And I want to make 4 groups out of these 12 apples. So I'm going to go right down the middle here and make a line there. I'm going to go right down the middle here and make another line. So now I want to check and make sure I've done it right. I've got 4 groups, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I want to make sure that I have an equal number of apples in each group. So let's make sure I've got 3 here, 1, 2, 3. I've got 3 in this group, 1, 2, 3. And here I've got 1, 2, 3 apples in this group, and 1, 2, 3 apples in this group. So I've got an equal number in each group, and I've made 4 groups. So by doing this, dividing into 4 groups, you can see that we have 3 apples in each group. So in other words, as we begin to speak in sort of a division language, we would say that we divided a group of 12 apples into 4 equal groups, and we now have 3 apples in each of our smaller groups. So if I were to write this in a mathematical sentence using division, I would write 12 divided by, this is the divided by symbol, 4 equals 3. So my mathematical division sentence for this problem here is 12 divided by 4 equals 3. And in our problem here, we have certain names, specific names for each of these numbers. Our first number here, our 12, is called the dividend. And the dividend is the number that represents the bigger group which is being divided. So in our case, our bigger group, which is getting divided and cut up, our bigger group was the 12 apples that we started with. So our 12 here is called the dividend. The next number here, our 4, is called the divisor. And the divisor is the number of smaller groups that you want to make. And in our case, we wanted to make 4 equal groups, smaller groups of apples, and so 4 is our divisor. So we have the dividend and the divisor. And then over here, this 3, which is kind of like our answer to our division problem of 12 divided by 4. This answer over here, this 3, we call the quotient. That might be a new word for you, quotient. And the quotient tells you how many objects are in each of your smaller groups. So in our case, there are 3 apples in each of our 4 equal groups. So in each of our smaller groups, there are 3 apples. So our quotient is 3. And we would read this sentence. To review here, we would read this sentence as 12 divided by 4 equals 3. Let's look at another example, very similar to the one that we just looked at, of dividing in a little bit different of a way. So we've got, again, 12 apples, but this time we're going to switch our problem a little bit, and instead of dividing our 12 apples into 4 equal smaller groups, we want to divide the apples into 3 equal groups this time. So again, I've got my 12 apples drawn on the board. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And this time I want 3 groups. So I'm going to take my 12 apples and I'm looking at them, seeing a group of them here, a group here, and a group here. Now remember, I want those 3 groups to have the exact same number of apples in each group. So I can't just take one here and one big one here and a little one here. I need them to be equal. So I've got one group here of 4 apples and another group here and a third group right here. And so I've taken my 12 apples and I've made 3 groups. I was asked to divide them into 3 equal groups. Now let's make sure that in each group I have the exact same number of apples. 1, 2, 3, 4. Got 4 apples in this group. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep, 4 apples in this group. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I've got 4 apples in all 3 of my groups. So we can see that 12 apples into 3 equal groups gives us smaller groups of 4 apples each. So let's write that using our division language. Let's write a mathematical sentence using division to represent what we're looking at here. So we have our 12, which is our original bigger group. And remember, we call that the dividend. That's our big group of 12 apples. So you write that number first. And then we divide by, and we want to put our divisor next. And remember that our divisor is how many smaller equal-sized groups we want to make. So we in this case made 3 groups. So this time I want to write 12 divided by 3 equals, and remember that the 3 is called our divisor. So we've got our dividend divided by divisor, and then equals is going to be our quotient. And remember that the quotient is the number of objects that are in each of our smaller groups, of our divided groups. So we can see that in each of these groups we have 4 apples. So our answer to the division problem, or our quotient in this case, is 4. So in our first example, we took 12 apples and divided them into 4 equal groups. This time we're taking 12 apples and we're dividing them into 3 equal groups, and we end up with 4 apples per group in this case. Now, looking at these 12 apples, we also could divide these apples into 2 groups of equal numbers in each group. Or we could divide 12 apples into 6 groups of equal number of apples per group. So depending on the number of groups you make, you are going to get a different number of apples in each of your smaller groups. But your number can be divided by many different numbers, and in these cases 12 could be divided by 3, can be divided by 4, 12 can be divided by 2, divided by 6, and we'll continue looking at these fun division problems of taking bigger groups and making them into smaller groups. Let's look at one more example of a division problem. So in this problem, I have the instructions. to divide 6 objects into 2 equal groups. So in this case, instead of using apples, I'm going to use slices of pie for my objects. So I've got this pie and I have it into how many slices? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I've got 6 slices of pie. 6 is my bigger group, my larger number that I want divided. And I want to divide these 6 groups into 2 equal groups. So I'm just going to take it right down the middle and look at this half of the pie as one of my groups, where I've got 1, 2, 3 slices of pie. And then I'm going to look at this half of the pie as my second group, where I also have 1, 2, 3 slices of pie. So when I have 2 equal groups in this case, each of my groups has 3 objects. So let's practice writing this as a division sentence or as a division problem. My first number is my larger group that I wanted to divide is 6. I had a total of 6 objects. That is my dividend. And then the next number that comes after the division sign is the divisor. And that is the number of groups that I wanted to make. So I wanted to make 2 groups. And then after the equal sign comes my quotient, which is the number of objects in each of these groups. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So I've got 3 objects in each of my smaller equally sized groups. So I would read this as 6 divided by 2 equals 3. Divisor, dividend, the bigger number, the first number is my dividend. Divisor, quotient. Now that we have looked at a few division examples, we have a basic understanding of what division is. Let's look at the definition of division again. So initially we had said that in division we take a number of objects and we break that group down into smaller groups of equal size. Now we're going to modify our definition just a little bit, and we're going to look at 2 different scenarios that we have with division. So in the first scenario, we have our total number of objects, and then we know the number of groups that we want to divide those objects into. We know the number of groups that need to be made. And we then use division to find out the number of objects in each group, similar to the examples we did. So say, for example, to remember our example with apples, if we have 12 apples and we know that we want to make 4 groups of apples with the same number of apples in each group. So for example, if we had those 12 apples and we've got 4 children that want those apples, and those 4 children want each of them to have the exact same number of apples, then we know in that case that we've got our 12 apples total, and we know that we want to make those into 4 equal groups. And then we would need to find out how many apples will be in each group. And so if you're taking a group of 12 and you're dividing them into 4 equal sized groups, when you divide, you would find then that each of those 4 groups would have 3 apples each in them. The second scenario that we have with division problems is that we have a number of objects and we know the size of each group. We know the number of objects that we want in each group that we want to make. And so we want to find out then in those type of division problems how many such groups we are able to make. So for example, if we had our 12 apples again, and now instead of looking at dividing them into 4 equally sized groups for each child, we might say that we have 12 apples and we have little baskets that we want to put the apples into. And each basket can fit 4 apples in it. So in this case, we know the number of objects in each group, and we, in our division problem, want to find out how many groups of 4 we can make. So in this case, we would be dividing our group of 12 apples into smaller sized groups, and when you divide, you will find out how many groups of 4 apples you are able to make. You know the answer to that from the problems that we've looked at is that we would be able to make 3 groups. So you can see with division that we are either counting the number of objects in a group or the number of groups that can be made. Division is a concept that can be difficult to understand. You will need to do a lot of practice to get really good at it. To be good at division, you need to know your multiplication facts really, really well. If you have not mastered your multiplication facts yet, I would recommend that you work on those first. So far, we have divided by drawing the number of objects and then dividing them by hand. Well, that's not too difficult to do when you're only drawing 12 or 6 or 4 objects. It works really well with these smaller numbers. But if your dividend is a really big number, it will be very difficult to divide this way. So there is another way that we work with division of bigger problems, and that is called long division, which we will work on in another lesson.